What would you do if the world looked at you and decided you didn't belong, even when you'd earned every right to be there? Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. Picture this: a calm morning flight, a first-class ticket with your name on it. You've worked your whole life to sit in that seat. Then, a stranger demands it and the crew agrees. The humiliation burns, not from losing the seat, but from realizing your success still isn't enough to buy respect. This is the moment that changed everything for Dr. Naomi Ellis, a black CEO whose quiet strength turned injustice into transformation. 5 minutes after she was forced to move, the world around her shifted. An airline, a culture, even a nation began to question what dignity truly means. But ask yourself this: if it happened to you, would you stand up in anger or stand firm in grace? And what if your silence could change the course of history? Join us as we unfold a true story of power, prejudice, and redemption that proves sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that grounds the storm. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to fly further. The boarding gate of SkyLuxe Flight 704 glowed under the pale lights of JFK Airport. It was almost 7 p.m., the kind of evening when travelers looked tired but hopeful, waiting to get home or chase another deal across the country. Dr. Naomi Ellis stood near the boarding lane, her black carry-on rolling quietly behind her. The faint hum of the terminal mixed with the smell of burnt coffee and rain. She checked her watch 8 minutes before takeoff. Seat 2A was waiting. Naomi was dressed simply gray blazer, dark jeans, a thin gold bracelet that had belonged to her mother. Her posture carried the calm of someone who'd survived storms before. She had many of them. The scanner beeped. The gate agent smiled politely and waved her through. She stepped onto the jet bridge, exhaled, and, for the first time that day, allowed herself to think about tomorrow's keynote in San Francisco ethics and artificial intelligence. It was ironic. She'd spent years teaching machines how to treat people fairly. Inside the cabin, the first-class section smelled of leather and citrus cleaner. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and sat down in 2A, next to the window. The seat felt cool beneath her fingertips. Outside, droplets chased one another across the glass. Naomi smiled softly. Just a few hours of quiet, she thought. Then came the voice, sharp, clipped. "Ma'am, I'm afraid this seat isn't for you." Naomi turned. A flight attendant with strawberry blonde hair stood beside her. The name tag read Rachel Burns. Naomi blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." Rachel's tone was rehearsed, polite but hollow. "This seat is reserved for one of our Diamond Elite passengers. You might be in the wrong section." Naomi reached into her purse and handed over her boarding pass. "It says 2A, first class." Rachel looked at the ticket, frowned for half a second, then forced a smile. "Oh, it must be a mix-up. Could you wait by the galley while we confirm?" The people in the nearby rows pretended not to listen, but every head tilted slightly. Naomi felt the weight of their gaze, the quiet judgment, the assumption. She rose slowly, heart steady, voice calm. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Before Rachel could answer, a man appeared behind her, tall, expensive suit, silver hair perfectly in place. His voice dripped entitlement. "I think there's been some confusion," he said. "I'm Edward Lang. This is my usual seat." Rachel's shoulders straightened, as if his presence validated her stance. Naomi looked at him. "I believe the airline assigned me 2A. Mr. Lang. He chuckled under his breath. I fly this route every week. They know me here. Naomi didn't move. Then, perhaps they'll remember me after tonight. A few passengers snickered quietly. One woman muttered, "Can you believe this?" The humiliation wasn't in the words, it was in the silence that followed them. Rachel glanced toward the front cabin. "Let me get my supervisor." Naomi stood still, eyes on the window. Outside, the rain turned heavier. Her mind drifted to another time, another room, when she was told she wasn't a good fit. The memory of polished tables and polite smiles that hid the same poison. A minute later, Trevor Davis, the flight supervisor, arrived. His uniform was sharp, his smile mechanical. What seems to be the issue, Rachel explained quickly, emphasizing Edward's status. Trevor nodded, then turned to Naomi with the condescending calm of someone who thought he was being fair. Ms. Ellis, is it? I'm afraid we'll need to move you to another seat until we sort this out. Please cooperate so we can keep the flight on schedule." Naomi noticed how he avoided eye contact when he said her name. She kept her voice even. "My boarding pass and confirmation number are correct. You're welcome to verify them." Trevor exhaled. "Let's not make this difficult." Edward smirked slightly, already lowering himself into 2A. Naomi watched his hands touch her seatbelt, her blanket. Something inside her tightened. Not anger. Not yet. Something older. She reached for her phone, opened the airline app, and displayed the receipt. Her name. Her seat. Paid in full. Trevor barely glanced at it. "We'll handle it after takeoff." That was when Naomi realized it wasn't about paperwork, it was about presence. She stepped aside as two security officers entered from the jet bridge. Passengers fell silent. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" one asked. Trevor answered before she could. "She's refusing to comply with a seating correction." Naomi's breath came slow. She met the officer's eyes. "I'm not refusing. I'm asking for fairness, but fairness wasn't on the manifest tonight." They gestured toward the exit. "Let's step outside, ma'am." Naomi gathered her bag. The officer's tone was civil, almost gentle, but the effect was the same. She was being removed. As she walked down the aisle, she caught fragments of whispers. "Crazy. Probably an upgrade mistake. Why argue halfway down the aisle?" She paused. Her smartwatch vibrated softly, a gentle pulse against her wrist. She tapped it 3 times. A faint light blinked green. No one noticed. Outside the cabin, the air was cooler. Rachel looked uneasy but said nothing. Trevor signed a note on his clipboard. Edward leaned back, sipping his champagne. Naomi waited by the gate, calm as a shadow. Inside her watch, an encrypted signal had already traveled 30,000 feet per second directly to Neuro Vista Technologies, her company. A silent report was filing itself: incident type, service discrimination, location, SkyLuxe 704 status active. 5 minutes had passed since the first sentence. "Ma'am, I'm afraid this seat isn't for you." The world, she knew, could change in less time than that. She watched the rain through the wide airport window and whispered to herself, "They still think power looks like him." Then, softer, "They're about to learn it looks like me." The hum of the engines echoed faintly from the tarmac. Somewhere inside, the story of Flight 704 had already begun to unravel. The air outside the cabin was colder than Naomi remembered. The sound of the terminal speakers faded into a dull hum. A voice announcing delayed flights, forgotten gates, names no one cared to answer. She stood still for a moment, watching the reflections on the glass. Inside, people were settling into their seats, unaware or perhaps unwilling to understand what had just happened. A cleaning cart squeaked by, leaving the faint scent of disinfectant in its wake. Naomi set her carry-on beside her, breathing evenly. Her mind was not racing. It never did. It simply observed every detail, every silence, every pattern repeating itself from one lifetime to another. Rachel Burns walked out of the jet bridge, her expression tight. She avoided eye contact as she pretended to adjust something on her tablet. Naomi almost pitied her. Almost. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm for what had just unfolded. "You know, that wasn't about a seat." Rachel's hands froze for a fraction of a second. Then she whispered, "I just follow procedure, ma'am. Procedures don't humiliate people," Naomi said softly. "People do that." For a moment, Rachel looked as if she wanted to say more, maybe even apologize. But fear, the kind that comes from years of needing a paycheck, won. She turned back toward the jet bridge and disappeared. Naomi exhaled. The same tired script, the same actors in different uniforms. She'd seen it at board meetings, at conferences, even at charity galas where people clapped for her success but looked away when she walked past them in a hotel lobby without her badge. The world had learned to polish its prejudice until it shone like professionalism. She walked toward the waiting area and sat near Gate 22. The rain outside was harder now, streaking the windows with silver threads. A little boy next to her was playing with a plastic plane, making quiet, whooshing sounds. His mother smiled at Naomi. It was the kind of smile that asked nothing, expected nothing, just a trace of kindness between strangers. Naomi smiled back. It steadied her. Her phone buzzed. A notification slid across the screen. Signal received. Internal alert triggered. EquiWatch active. Good. The system was doing exactly what it was built to do. Record, verify, protect. Years ago, she'd designed it after a friend was removed from a hotel lobby for loitering while waiting for his client. The data had cleared his name, but the damage to his dignity had never left him. She looked down at her wrist. The tiny light on her smartwatch blinked twice more, confirming data transfer. Somewhere, deep inside NeuroVista's network, a digital footprint was being formed, timestamps, audio snippets, facial recognition tags. It wasn't revenge, it was evidence. A voice broke through her thoughts. "Excuse me, were you just on that flight?" Naomi turned. A woman in her 30s, wearing a denim jacket and glasses, held up her phone. "I'm Elena Torres. I was 2 rows behind you. I recorded part of what happened. Is it okay if I send it to you?" Naomi hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Thank you." Elena sat beside her. It was hard to watch. "You didn't even raise your voice." "I learned a long time ago," Naomi said quietly, "that when people expect you to lose your temper, silence scares them more." Elena smiled faintly. "I think you just scared an entire corporation." Naomi's lips curved. "Let's see if they realize it yet." As they talked, the terminal loudspeakers announced Flight 704 now delayed due to a technical verification process, estimated departure unknown. Passengers groaned in the distance. Naomi closed her eyes, allowing herself one small, quiet victory. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. She had spent her career trying to make technology humane, to teach algorithms to see people equally. And tonight, technology was about to remind humanity what fairness looked like. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. The screen flashed a name, Marcus Dean. Naomi. His voice was low, steady. "I'm fine," she said. "I saw the flag come through the system. It's already trending online. Someone uploaded footage to 3 platforms. Your name isn't in it yet, but people are furious." "Good," she said. "Let them be. Do you want me to contact SkyLuxe Legal?" "Not yet. Let them play their part first. I want to see how far they'll go before they realize who I am." Marcus chuckled softly. "You always did have a flair for poetic justice." Naomi smiled faintly. Poetry teaches patience. When the call ended, she glanced toward the rain again. It was pouring now, drumming against the glass like restless fingertips. Somewhere inside, the engines of Flight 704 had gone silent. Through the window, she could see Rachel pacing near the cockpit door. Trevor stood stiffly, phone pressed to his ear, eyes darting toward the cabin. Edward Lang was still seated, his champagne untouched now, irritation replacing arrogance. Even from this distance, Naomi could read it the discomfort of a man who had always been right. Suddenly sensing he might not be this time, Elena followed her gaze. "They look nervous." "They should be," Naomi murmured. "They think they grounded me. But it's the plane that's not going anywhere." The journalist studied her face for a moment. "You're going to make this public, aren't you?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Her thoughts flickered to the keynote speech she'd prepared for the next morning. The slides about ethical data, about human bias leaking into machine learning. She'd written a line at the end of that presentation: "The danger isn't in machines learning from us. It's in them learning who we really are." Yes, she thought, maybe this was the moment to show them. Her phone buzzed again. New message, System Escalation Level 2. Contract clause triggered. Naomi felt the weight of the words. The clause. Buried deep inside SkyLuxe's licensing agreement with NeuroVista was a section few people paid attention to, a failsafe that allowed her company to suspend algorithmic services in cases of verified ethical breach. It meant the airline's ticketing, onboard Wi-Fi, entertainment systems, and loyalty data operations, all powered by NeuroVista, were about to freeze. Elena leaned forward. "You just smiled." Naomi looked up, serene. "Sometimes you have to let a storm run its course before the sky clears." The airport lights flickered briefly. Somewhere, a system restarted. Naomi's phone vibrated with another alert: operational lock initiated. SkyLuxe internal network paused. Within minutes, confused announcements echoed through the terminal: "Attention passengers, technical issue under review. Please remain seated." Naomi sipped from her water bottle. Calm as ever. Across the glass, Trevor was on another call now, his movements frantic. Rachel's shoulders slumped. Edward Lang stood, gesturing in frustration. Naomi watched him point toward the window, yelling words she couldn't hear. His expression was disbelief wrapped in panic. Elena caught it all through her camera lens. "This is unreal," she whispered. "It's real," Naomi said softly. "It's just not the kind of reality they're used to." The moment stretched into stillness. The loudspeaker repeated the same message again. And then, over the hum of the terminal, came the faintest ripple of applause from a cluster of passengers who had guessed what was happening. Naomi didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The world had already shifted a little on its axis. A small girl ran past, her laughter ringing bright and honest against the gray noise. Naomi smiled at that sound. It reminded her of something she still believed, that dignity, like light, always finds its way through the cracks. Elena lowered her phone. "If you ever tell this story," she said, "people won't believe it." Naomi's answer was gentle, but firm. "They don't have to believe me. They'll see the results." The rain eased, the lights steadied, and for the first time that night, Naomi felt the kind of quiet that follows when truth begins to breathe. The cabin of Flight 704 had turned from calm to restless. Edward Lang adjusted his cufflinks as if the shine of silver could hide the unease building behind his chest. The champagne flute in front of him had gone flat, the bubbles dying quietly as the aircraft remained motionless. He didn't like waiting. Men like him never did. Outside, passengers stared through the glass as if watching a show they didn't understand. Inside, Edward's world, carefully built from influence, reputation, and the illusion of control, was beginning to crack in ways he couldn't quite name. Rachel Burns stood near the galley, whispering into her earpiece. She had the pale, drawn look of someone trying to pretend nothing was wrong while feeling everything collapse around her. "Yes, sir," she said to the unseen voice. "We're grounded." "No, I don't know why." "Systems froze. The supervisor's handling it." Trevor Davis, the so-called supervisor, was pacing near the cockpit door. Phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice, usually steady, was now sharp and clipped. "No, this isn't a joke. Everything just stopped working. I can't even pull up passenger data or cabin reports." Edward frowned. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "This airline's gone downhill." He flagged Rachel over. "Get me the captain," he demanded. "Tell him to sort this nonsense out." Rachel hesitated. "Mr. Lang, we're still waiting for clearance. I didn't ask for your opinion." Edward interrupted. "I asked for action. Someone needs to fix this. Now." Rachel's throat tightened. For a moment, she thought of Naomi Ellis, the quiet woman who had been sitting right there not 15 minutes ago. The calm in her eyes, the weight of her silence. It unsettled her more than Edward's voice ever could. She turned away, whispering into her earpiece again. But the connection crackled, then died completely. Edward gritted his teeth. "What the hell is going on here?" Trevor glanced back at him, irritation edging into his tone. "Sir, please stay seated. We're dealing with a technical failure." Edward scoffed. "Technical failure? Please, this is incompetence. Call someone who can fix it." The captain, Victor Hale, stepped out of the cockpit. His face was lined from years of high altitude and long hours, but now those lines carved deeper. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we're experiencing a temporary communication disruption. Please remain patient." Edward raised his voice. "Temporary. You've been parked for 40 minutes. I have a deposition in San Francisco at 9 Ma'am." "Sir," Victor said curtly, "I'm aware of your schedule. Please lower your voice." Something inside Edward snapped. For the first time in years, he felt small, powerless. The control he carried like perfume had evaporated. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a threat. Victor's eyes met his without a flicker. "Right now, sir, you're a passenger. That's all I need to know." The words hung heavy in the air. The cabin went silent. Edward sat down slowly, the echo of humiliation filling the space Naomi had left behind. Outside, in the terminal, Naomi watched everything unfold through the glass wall. Elena's camera captured the captain's calm defiance, the lawyer's disbelief, the quiet unraveling of arrogance. "Perfect," Elena whispered. "Every second of this tells a story." Naomi didn't reply. She was studying something else the way Rachel kept glancing toward the window, guilt flickering across her face like lightning behind clouds. In her mind, Naomi saw the pattern forming: denial, confusion, exposure, the stages of a system realizing it was no longer untouchable. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus's voice came through. "Naomi, we've confirmed everything. The contract clause has triggered full suspension. SkyLuxe's board is panicking. They're trying to reach you." "They'll get my response soon," Naomi said. "They're saying it's a technical error." "Of course they are," she murmured. "Every injustice begins with someone calling it a mistake." She stood, straightening her blazer, her expression serene. "I'm heading back to the gate." Elena followed, camera in hand. "You're really going back there? I built the system that holds them accountable," Naomi said quietly. It's time they met the woman behind it. As they walked down the jet bridge, the air felt electric, charged with the invisible energy of truth being forced into the open. When Naomi reached the cabin door, Victor turned, startled. "Ma'am, this area is restricted." Naomi handed him her ID card. The logo on it shimmered faintly under the cabin lights. "Neurovista Technologies." "I'm Dr. Naomi Ellis," she said evenly. "Your airline's ethical compliance partner." Rachel's eyes widened. Trevor went pale. Edward's jaw tightened. Naomi stepped inside the cabin, her voice calm but carrying through every seat. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "And misunderstandings have consequences." Victor tried to recover. "Dr. Ellis, if you'll give us a moment." She raised her hand. "The moments passed. SkyLuxe has violated Clause 14C of our agreement. Your system shutdown isn't a glitch, it's accountability." The silence that followed was so deep it seemed to hum. Rachel's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Trevor took a step back, eyes darting toward the cabin phone that no longer worked. Edward Lang rose, face flushed. "You're the reason we're stuck. You can't just hold a plane hostage because you're upset about a seat." Naomi turned to him slowly, her expression almost kind. "No, Mr. Lang, I'm not upset. I'm precise." He laughed bitterly. "You think this will make people respect you?" "No," she said softly. "It will make them remember me." Elena's camera captured the exchange, her hands trembling slightly as she realized what she was witnessing. Victor cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellis, I'm sure we can resolve this through proper channels." Naomi looked at him, her voice level. "The proper channels failed the moment your crew decided who was worthy of being in this seat." Her eyes flicked briefly toward 2A. Edward's briefcase still sat there, gleaming under the cabin light like a symbol of misplaced privilege. She turned back toward the door. "This flight will remain grounded until SkyLuxe's leadership meets me in person. You have 1 hour." Then she stepped out, leaving a silence that felt heavier than any turbulence. Inside, Edward collapsed back into the seat, staring at the window. His reflection looked older than it had when he boarded. Rachel leaned against the wall, eyes wet. She wasn't wrong, she whispered. Victor's voice was low. "We'll see if the company thinks so." Trevor said nothing. For the first time in years, he wished he had listened instead of obeyed. Outside, Naomi walked toward the far end of the terminal where the lights dimmed into quiet. She sat on a bench, exhaling slowly, The adrenaline had passed. What remained was a strange stillness. Elena sat beside her. "You looked calm," she said, "but I could see you were shaking a little." Naomi smiled faintly. "I was. Calm doesn't mean unshaken. Do you ever get tired of fighting like this?" Naomi's eyes softened. "Every day. But silence tires me more." A pause settled between them. The rain had stopped, leaving a faint mist curling around the edges of the runway lights. Naomi looked down at her watch. The green light blinked once, then twice. A message appeared on her phone. "Board acknowledgement received. Meeting scheduled. 10:15 p.m. local time." "They took the bait," she murmured. Elena tilted her head. "What happens next?" Naomi's gaze turned distant, her voice almost a whisper. "Next, they remember who built the wings they're standing on." She rose, picking up her carry-on, the soft rhythm of her heels echoing through the quiet terminal. For the first time that night, she felt something close to peace, not because justice had arrived, but because it was finally on its way, behind her. The plane remained still on the tarmac, a metal giant humbled by one woman's silence. The rain had eased by the time Dr. Naomi Ellis stepped into the glass tower that housed SkyLuxe's executive headquarters near Terminal 8. The marble floors gleamed, and the scent of antiseptic polish floated through the air, as if the building itself was trying to erase guilt. She walked past security without a word. They had been expecting her. When the elevator doors closed, the silence was broken only by the faint hum of her smartwatch syncing data. Her reflection on the steel door looked composed, but inside, a storm brewed quietly, the kind that didn't roar, only deepened. When the elevator opened, a young assistant hurried forward, face pale with nerves. "Dr. Ellis, they're waiting in the boardroom," he said softly, as if the walls could hear. Naomi gave a brief nod and followed. The boardroom was wide, bright, and cold. 12 people sat around the long table, their faces flickering under the glow of LED lights. At the far end sat Richard Langston, the CEO of SkyLuxe Airways sharp suit, silver hair, same piercing eyes Naomi remembered from the shareholder meeting 2 years ago. Beside him was Denise Callahan, chairwoman of Ethics and Compliance, her lips pressed in a tight line. "Dr. Ellis," Langston began, his tone smooth but brittle. "It's late. We appreciate your time, but grounding a flight full of passengers was an excessive move." "Don't you think?" Naomi placed her tablet on the table and looked around the room before speaking. "What's excessive," she said evenly, "is humiliating a paying customer because of the color of her skin." The words cut through the air like the click of a lock turning. Langston leaned back in his chair. "I was told this was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Naomi interrupted gently. "Your staff removed me from my assigned seat, escorted me off the aircraft, and called security. They refused to review evidence presented on the spot. If that's what you call a misunderstanding, then SkyLuxe has a systemic problem." A murmur rippled through the board. Denise cleared her throat. "We're investigating, of course, but you activated a system-wide shutdown. Thousands of flights were delayed." Naomi's eyes didn't flinch. "The system responded exactly as designed. You partnered with my company for ethical oversight. The NeuroVista protocol activates when discrimination or abuse of authority is detected and ignored. It's not sabotage, it's accountability." Langston's composure slipped for a fraction of a second. "You're threatening our operations." "No," Naomi said softly. Your employees already did that when they mistook prejudice for procedure." The room went silent. Behind Naomi, Elena stood quietly recording, the soft red light of her camera blinking like a heartbeat. Naomi opened a file on her tablet and turned it toward the table. "Here," she said, "is the footage from the flight's cabin cameras, cross-verified with passenger smartphones uploaded through our real-time fairness index." The screen came alive. Rachel's uneasy smile, Trevor's dismissive tone, Edward's smug voice, Naomi's calm insistence, the security officers escorting her out, the passengers watching in silence. Then, the line that had started it all. "Ma'am, I'm afraid this seat isn't for you." The playback ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Denise's voice broke the stillness. "Dr. Ellis, what do you want from us?" Naomi folded her hands. Not an apology. A transformation. Langston raised an eyebrow. "Transformation. I want the dismissal of the staff involved, immediate suspension of your bias-prone seat allocation system, and the formation of an independent passenger equity council, one that reports directly to the Department of Transportation, not your PR department." "That's unrealistic," Langston said, his tone hardening. "We can't fire an entire crew because of one incident." Naomi met his gaze. "You already did worse when you allowed that incident to define who you are as a company." He opened his mouth to respond, but she continued, her tone steady, measured, relentless. "SkyLuxe markets luxury. But luxury without dignity is just ego wrapped in linen. My company's technology was built to detect what humans ignore the moment when someone stops seeing another as equal." Langston shifted in his chair. "You're leveraging this to control us." Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm leveraging this to remind you that control has consequences." At that moment, Marcus Dean's voice chimed through Naomi's earpiece. "They just released an internal memo to the press," he said. "They're calling it a system malfunction." Naomi glanced at the board. "That memo," she said, "is about to be the most expensive lie this airline ever told." She tapped her watch once. Instantly, the wall screen behind her illuminated with a live feed news outlets running the footage from Elena's camera. Social media trending with the tag Icosite 2A. The executive stared in shock as the words "Racial Bias Grounds SkyLuxe Flight" scrolled across the ticker. Naomi stood, her voice calm. The world is watching. What happens next defines whether SkyLuxe becomes a symbol of progress or a case study in arrogance. Langston's jaw tightened. "You're blackmailing us." She looked at him quietly. "I'm reminding you that justice delayed is justice denied." Denise closed her folder, her voice trembling. "Richard, she's right. If we don't act now, the damage will be irreversible." Langston rubbed his temples. "Fine. Suspend the crew, launch the audit, but I expect the system restored immediately." Naomi paused, then nodded. "Once those suspensions are filed and the public statement acknowledges the truth, not a malfunction, but discrimination, your systems will resume." Langston glared at her. "You think you've won?" Naomi turned toward the door, her words soft but edged with steel. "This isn't about winning. It's about remembering who we are when no one's watching." Outside the boardroom, Elena followed her, still recording. "You just dismantled one of the most powerful airline boards in 20 minutes, she whispered. Naomi smiled faintly. "No, I gave them a mirror." They stepped into the night air, cool and smelling faintly of jet fuel and rain. The airport lights flickered on the wet asphalt like reflections of something larger truth. Maybe, or redemption trying to find its shape. Back on the tarmac, Trevor and Rachel were being escorted from the aircraft. Rachel's eyes were red, her voice small as she whispered to the captain, "I didn't mean it to go that far." Victor Hale nodded silently. Meanin', well, isn't the same as doing right. Inside the terminal, Edward Lang was pacing, phone pressed to his ear. "No, I don't care about PR," he hissed. "Find me her background, everything." He ended the call, staring through the glass where Naomi and Elena disappeared into the night. For the first time, his reflection unsettled him. It wasn't power he saw, it was fear. Hours later, the statement hit every news outlet in America. SkyLuxe Airways acknowledges discriminatory conduct aboard Flight 704, effective immediately. The entire crew has been terminated pending investigation. A new passenger equity initiative will be co-led by Dr. Naomi Ellis of NeuroVista Technologies in homes, offices, airports, and coffee shops. The story spread like wildfire. People debated, argued, reflected. Some defended the airline. Others praised Naomi. But one common thread bound them: nobody could look away. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment overlooking the Hudson, Naomi sat on her couch, tea steaming in her hands, the city lights blinking softly through the window. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls and messages she didn't answer. She just watched the rain, listened to its rhythm against the glass. Elena's message appeared on her screen. "They're calling you the woman who grounded an airline." Naomi smiled, tired, wistful. "Let them call me what they want," she typed back. "I just wanted them to see." The clock struck midnight. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over New York, a sound that felt less like anger and more like renewal. Naomi leaned back, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow, we start rebuilding." The morning light crept through the blinds of Naomi's apartment like a quiet visitor. The city outside was still damp from last night's rain, the streets shining with reflections of a world trying to begin again. On the kitchen counter, her phone buzzed endlessly, vibrating against the marble surface with a rhythm that felt almost alive. She let it ring. The tea in her cup had gone cold, untouched, but she didn't mind. For the first time in weeks, her mind was still. When she finally picked up the phone, it wasn't a reporter or a lawyer, it was her mother's voice, soft, aged, carrying the kind of strength that only comes from surviving too many heartbreaks. "I saw you on the news, baby," she said. "You did what you had to do." Naomi closed her eyes. "It's not over yet, Mama. The fallout is just beginning." Her mother chuckled, that low, familiar hum. Fallout means the truth finally got loud enough to be heard. Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe. You always were the calm in every storm," her mother continued. "But remember, even calm waters need rest." After they hung up, Naomi stood by the window, watching the first flights rise from JFK, their contrails streaking across the pale blue sky. Somewhere among those passengers were people who'd read her story, some who understood, some who didn't, and others who might think differently because of it. That thought, more than any headline, brought her peace. Down on the street, Elena Torres was waiting, camera bag slung over her shoulder. She looked up and waved when Naomi stepped out. "You look like you haven't slept," Elena said. "I haven't," Naomi replied, smiling lightly. "You ready always?" They walked toward a nearby cafe. The kind of place where people read newspapers instead of scrolling phones. Every table had at least one paper spread open, Naomi's face on the front page beneath bold headlines, the CEO who grounded an airline. When they entered, conversations dimmed. Some people stared, others nodded respectfully. An elderly man near the counter whispered, "That's her." Naomi felt the attention but didn't shrink from it. She ordered black coffee, thanked the barista, and took a seat by the window. Elena placed a small recorder on the table. "They're saying SkyLuxe might lose $1 billion in market value," she said quietly. "Richard Langston hasn't been seen since last night. Denise Callahan's leading the crisis team." Naomi stirred her coffee slowly. Maybe it's time the cost of bias became visible. Elena leaned forward. "Do you think it'll actually change anything?" Naomi's gaze drifted toward the window again. Change isn't one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 quiet ones after. People talk, systems adapt, and maybe the next person doesn't have to explain why they belong in seat 2A. Before Elena could respond, Naomi's phone buzzed again. It was Marcus Dean. She answered. "They're asking for you at the press briefing." Marcus said, "Denise wants you to stand beside her." Naomi hesitated. "Is Langston attending?" "No. He's stepping down." The words hung between them. After a pause, Naomi said softly, "Then maybe it's time to close the circle." 2 hours later, the SkyLuxe headquarters was swarmed with reporters. Flashbulbs popped, microphones extended, and camera shutters clicked like distant thunder. Denise Callahan stood at the podium, her posture dignified but weary. Beside her stood Naomi, composed, in a charcoal blazer and the simple pearl earrings. Denise began, her voice steady but laced with remorse. "Yesterday, our airline failed to uphold the values we claim to represent. We allowed bias and arrogance to humiliate a passenger who deserved our respect. Effective immediately, SkyLuxe Airways will be implementing a full transparency and accountability overhaul in partnership with NeuroVista Technologies. Dr. Naomi Ellis will serve as the independent chair of the Passenger Equity Council." Reporters erupted with questions. "Dr. Ellis, how do you feel knowing your actions cost thousands of employees their jobs?" Naomi stepped forward, voice firm but compassionate. "Accountability isn't about punishment. It's about repair. The people who lost their positions weren't fired because they made one mistake. They were part of a culture that refused to see. We can't heal what we won't acknowledge." Another reporter shouted, "Do you forgive them?" Naomi paused. The room fell quiet. "Forgiveness isn't a headline," she said finally. "It's a process. I don't forgive systems until they change, but I believe people can learn." Her words carried through the air like a melody that didn't need instruments. Later, after the briefing ended, Denise walked beside her toward the lobby. "You could have destroyed us," Denise said quietly, "but you didn't." Naomi smiled faintly. "Destruction never builds anything worth keeping. Richard thought you'd humiliate him publicly. I don't need to humiliate men like Richard Langston," Naomi replied. "They do it themselves." As she turned to leave, Denise called out, "Naomi, thank you." Outside, the air felt lighter, as if the city itself exhaled after a long night of holding its breath. Elena caught up with her, excitement flickering in her eyes. "You realize you just changed the conversation for the entire industry, right?" Naomi laughed softly. "Then, I guess I did my job." They walked toward the parking lot, the sounds of the city wrapping around them like music, car horns, chatter, distant laughter, A black SUV pulled up beside them. The driver rolled down the window. "Doctor, Ellis, Mr. Langston would like to meet you privately. He asked me to bring you to his residence." Elena tensed. "You don't have to go." Naomi hesitated, then said quietly, "No, I think I should." The ride was silent except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. When they reached Langston's estate on the outskirts of the city, the air smelled of pine and regret. The man who had once towered over a boardroom now stood by a fireplace, his eyes hollow. "I suppose you've come to see the fall," he said bitterly. Naomi shook her head. "I came because you asked." Langston poured 2 glasses of water, his hands trembling slightly. "You destroyed me. Dr. Ellis?" "No," she replied gently. "I revealed you. There's a difference." He stared at her. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything?" "Yes," Naomi said quietly. "I've lost things you can't see. Dignity, safety, the assumption that I belonged. But I built something from that loss, a system that makes sure no one else has to." Langston lowered his eyes. "Maybe I deserved it. Maybe," Naomi said softly. "But this isn't about what you deserved. It's about what you do next." He looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "You still believe there's a next for people like me?" She nodded. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be here." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them. Finally, Langston spoke again. "What would you have done if they hadn't removed you from that seat?" Naomi smiled sadly. "Probably closed my eyes, ordered tea, and written another speech about fairness. Maybe this was the only way anyone would really listen." When she left his house, the night air was cold and clear. She looked up at the stars scattered like shards of glass across the sky. Somewhere up there, Flight 704 was back in service, carrying people who would never know how close they came to witnessing something larger than themselves. Elena texted her as she got into the car. "You okay?" Naomi typed back. "I think I finally am." As the car pulled away, the city lights shimmered ahead, bright, unbroken, infinite. Naomi rested her head against the window and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe justice isn't thunder after all. Maybe it's the quiet after the rain." 2 weeks after the storm, the city had moved on, or so it seemed. The headlines had faded from front pages. But the echo of Flight 704 lingered in quiet corners and boardrooms where executives whispered about reputation risk, in classrooms where young law students debated ethics, and in airports where attendants suddenly spoke softer, listened longer, and thought twice before judging a passenger by their appearance. Change, Naomi knew, didn't shout, it whispered, patient and persistent. At the NeuroVista headquarters in downtown Manhattan, Naomi sat in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the skyline. Her reflection in the window looked calm, but her eyes told a different story, focused, searching. On the table in front of her were reports SkyLuxe's bias audit, passenger equity training modules, early feedback from flight crews, progress, yes, but she knew better than anyone that real reform was never clean. It was messy, uneven, and always resisted. Marcus Dean entered with his usual composed stride, a cup of black coffee in each hand. "You haven't eaten again," he said, placing one in front of her. Naomi smiled faintly. "You sound like my mother." "That's because she's right," Marcus replied, and, for the record, the Department of Transportation just confirmed the Passenger Equity Council's charter. It's official, you're now the first independent civil equity chair in airline history." Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That title means nothing if we don't make it real." Marcus took a sip of coffee. "You already made it real. You made them listen." She glanced at him. Listening isn't the same as understanding. Before he could respond, her assistant, Clara Ung, appeared at the door. "Dr. Ellis, there's someone here to see you. Says her name is Rachel Burns." Naomi froze. For a moment, she didn't speak. "Send her in." Rachel stepped into the room cautiously, her posture smaller than Naomi remembered. She looked different, hair tied back, makeup gone, eyes tired but sincere. "Dr. Ellis," she began softly. "Thank you for seeing me." Naomi gestured for her to sit. "You didn't have to come here." "I did," Rachel said, voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to apologize in person. Not because of the cameras, because I've been replaying that moment over and over in my head, and I can't forgive myself for how I treated you." Naomi studied her for a long moment. "Tell me why you did it," she said finally. Rachel's eyes welled. It wasn't hate, it was fear. Fear of getting in trouble, of upsetting a rich passenger, of breaking the unspoken rule keep the important ones happy. "I saw your confidence and she swallowed. I mistook it for arrogance. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. I was wrong." The silence that followed was long and heavy, but not cruel. Naomi's expression softened. "Fear makes people do quiet violence," she said gently. "I've seen it my whole life." Rachel nodded, tears falling freely now. "They called me after the investigation, said I could reapply once the training's complete. But I don't want to go back. I want to do something that matters." Naomi leaned forward. "Then help me. The Passenger Equity Council needs trainers who've seen both sides, those who've made mistakes and learned from them." Rachel blinked. "You'd trust me after what happened. I don't trust what you were," Naomi said. "I trust who you're trying to become." Rachel let out a shaky laugh, relief breaking through the guilt. "Thank you," she whispered. When she left, Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're giving her a second chance." Naomi smiled faintly. "Redemption isn't a privilege, it's a responsibility." Later that afternoon, Elena Torres visited the office with her camera crew. "The world still wants your story," she said, "but I don't think they realize you're already writing a new one." Naomi chuckled. "I'm not interested in being the story." "Elena, I'm interested in changing who gets to tell it." They sat by the window as the sun dipped low over Manhattan. Elena turned off her recorder for once and asked quietly, "What did it feel like?" "That moment when you pressed your watch and everything stopped." Naomi thought for a while before answering. "Like I was finally allowed to breathe, but also like I'd just opened a wound that would take years to heal." Elena nodded slowly. "You think it was worth it?" Naomi's eyes softened. "If even one little girl watches that video and realizes she doesn't have to shrink herself to be respected, then, yes, it was worth every bruise on my piece." That night, as she left the office, the city lights seemed warmer than usual. She walked along the Hudson, coat wrapped tightly around her, the wind teasing strands of her hair. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I was on Flight 704. I didn't speak up. I should have. I'm sorry." Naomi stopped walking. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. "Thank you for seeing it now. Next time, use your voice. The next morning, SkyLuxe unveiled its new campaign, "Every Seat Deserves Dignity." Naomi watched from her office as the commercial aired passengers of every color, age, and background boarding calmly, being greeted with genuine smiles. The tagline appeared across the screen, "Inspired by true events." Her phone rang again. This time it was Denise Callahan. "The campaign's a success," Denise said. "Public sentiment's shifted. Investors are relieved. You've turned our downfall into a lesson." Naomi smiled faintly. That was the point. And Langston. He's starting a foundation for diversity in aviation. I think he finally understood. After the call, Naomi sat quietly, gazing at the skyline. The world outside her window looked unchanged, yet she could feel the current of something new running beneath it, like the low hum of an engine before takeoff. That evening, she received an invitation to speak at Columbia University, "The Future of Ethical Leadership." She stared at the words for a moment before whispering, "Full circle." When she took the stage a week later, the auditorium was packed. Students, professionals, reporters all waiting to hear from the woman who had grounded an airline. She began without notes. "When people talk about justice," she said, "they imagine noise protests, outrage, fire. But sometimes justice is quiet. It's the stillness after you choose not to shrink. It's the pause between humiliation and dignity, when you realize you don't owe anyone your silence." The audience leaned in, drawn not by spectacle but by truth. "I didn't ground that flight because I was angry," she continued. "I did it because anger without direction burns everything. I wanted to light something instead of path, maybe, for those who come after." When she finished, the hall erupted in applause, but Naomi's eyes caught one person near the back, a teenage girl with brown skin and shy eyes, clapping with tears streaming down her face. That was the moment Naomi finally felt something she hadn't allowed herself to since that night at JFK Peace. Later, as she stepped outside into the cool night, she whispered to the wind, "We belong in every seat we've earned." Her phone buzzed one last time before she tucked it away. It was from Rachel, first training session complete. "It went well. Thank you for believing in me." Naomi smiled, eyes reflecting the city lights. "We're all still learning," she murmured. "That's how healing begins." The hum of distant airplanes filled the sky above. No longer symbols of power or exclusion, but of something else: movement, possibility, renewal. Naomi turned toward the sound, letting it fade into the distance like a promise kept. The wind over the Hudson carried the scent of spring rain as Naomi stood on the balcony of her office. The city stretching endlessly below. Lights flickered like distant promises. She had been in constant meetings for weeks, government panels, ethics committees, press inquiries, but tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to pause. There was something almost fragile about silence after a revolution. Behind her, Marcus Dean leaned against the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie undone. "You keep looking at that skyline like it owes you an answer," he said quietly. Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe it does. Maybe I'm just trying to remember why I started, because you were tired of being invisible." Marcus replied. Naomi turned toward him. "I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be heard. There's a difference." He nodded, understanding. "You've been invited to the Global Equity Summit in Geneva," he said. "They want you to open the conference." "Another stage," Naomi murmured. "Another speech." "It matters," he said. "The world's listening now." Naomi looked down at the streets far below, tiny dots of people moving in rhythm, unaware of how fragile fairness could be. "Listening isn't the same as changing," she said softly, "but maybe it's where change begins." A faint knock interrupted them. Clara Ung peeked in, holding a sealed envelope. "Dr. Ellis." This came by courier, hand-delivered. Naomi took it, recognizing the crest embossed in silver SkyLuxe Foundation for Ethical Aviation. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single-page letter, handwritten in crisp black ink. "Dr. Ellis, we're launching the Langston Fellowship for Diversity in Aerospace. I'd like you to present the first award. Consider it a small step toward the world you fought for. Richard Langston." Naomi's fingers lingered on the paper. "He didn't need to reach out," she whispered. Marcus smiled. "Maybe he did. Maybe this is how people start to rebuild themselves." 3 days later. Naomi boarded a plane for Chicago the first time she had flown since Flight 704. As she stepped into the terminal, a hush followed her, a mix of recognition and reverence. Passengers looked up from their phones, attendants straightened their postures, and an elderly woman with silver hair whispered, "That's her. Isn't it the one who stopped the plane?" Naomi smiled politely, offering a quiet nod before boarding. The captain, a black woman with kind eyes, greeted her personally. "Dr. Ellis," she said warmly, "welcome aboard. It's an honor." For a brief second, Naomi's throat tightened. "Thank you, Captain," she managed. "It's good to be here." She sat by the window again, seat 2A. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the engines hummed to life, she exhaled deeply. This time, there was no confrontation, no whispers, only stillness. Halfway through the flight, the attendant brought her tea. "On the house," the woman said with a smile. "For everything you've done." Naomi smiled back. "For everyone who deserves better," she corrected gently. When the plane landed in Chicago, reporters were waiting near the exit gate, flashes sparking like restless lightning. Naomi kept her composure, greeting them with measured grace. At the event hall that evening, she met Richard Langston for the first time since that night. He looked older, quieter, humility replacing the arrogance that once filled his presence. "Dr. Ellis," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Naomi shook it firmly. "Congratulations on the fellowship. It's a good start." Richard gave a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "A small redemption, maybe, though I suspect I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." They took their seats on stage. The lights dimmed as the audience of scholars, engineers, and students filled the auditorium. Denise Callahan opened the ceremony with a short speech, introducing the first recipient, a young woman from Atlanta who designed low-cost drone delivery systems for disaster zones. Her name was Maya Benton, and as she approached the stage, she couldn't stop shaking. Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. "Breathe," she whispered. Maya smiled nervously. "I watched your video 100 times," she admitted. "Every time someone doubted me, I'd play it again. You reminded me that silence is a choice." Naomi felt something stir deep within her chest, an ache that was half pride, half disbelief. "Then promise me one thing," she said softly. "Use your voice to build, not to burn." When Maya took the microphone, her first words silenced the room. "I never thought someone who looked like me could belong in this field, but because one woman refused to give up her seat, I know I belong anywhere I work to be." Applause erupted, long and thunderous. Naomi turned slightly, catching Richard's gaze across the table. His eyes were glistening, and he mouthed two words: "Thank you." Later that night, when the crowd had dispersed, Naomi and Elena stood on the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. The city lights shimmered over the water, and the air smelled faintly of lilacs and rain. "Do you realize what just happened in there?" Elena asked, leaning against the railing. "That young woman, that entire audience, they didn't come to see a scandal. They came to see hope." Naomi smiled softly. "Hope's a fragile thing. Elena, it needs feeding." Elena turned to her. "You've done that. You've built something that'll outlive all of us." Naomi laughed quietly. "Maybe, but legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we start in others." Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Rachel Burns. "Training's expanding to 2 more airlines. Thank you again for believing I could be part of something good." Naomi read the words twice, then showed the screen to Elena. "That," she said softly, "is what change looks like." They stood there in silence for a long time, listening to the soft lap of water against the dock. Naomi's mind drifted to her mother's voice again, the one that always reminded her to rest. Maybe soon, she thought, but not yet. Back at her hotel, Naomi sat by the window overlooking the glowing city. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter and traffic below. She thought of Flight 704, not the pain, but the possibility it had uncovered. She thought of Edward Lang, probably somewhere avoiding interviews, and of the countless people who had written her letters, some angry, some grateful, all changed in some way. She opened her journal and began to write, "Justice isn't a single act. It's a series of choices made in silence, small, unglamorous moments when we decide to do what's right instead of what's easy. The world doesn't need louder heroes. It needs steadier ones." She closed the notebook, feeling the weight of her own words settle like a calm tide. As she turned off the lamp, the city lights danced on the ceiling, forming shapes that looked almost like wings. Tomorrow, she would fly again, this time to Geneva, to speak about ethical power, about how dignity could be engineered into systems the way wings are built into planes. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest. The world outside kept moving, but inside her chest, there was peace. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't dared to claim since that humiliating night at JFK. She felt free. The Geneva morning unfolded like watercolor light spilling over glass towers and distant mountains. Naomi Ellis stood before the wide window of her hotel room, her reflection framed by the Alps. There was peace in the view, but also weight. In a few hours, she would speak at the Global Equity Summit, her first major address since the SkyLuxe incident. Every network in the world would be watching. Every question, every glance would dissect not just her words, but what she represented. She took a slow breath, tracing the steam rising from her cup of black coffee. "Just another day," she whispered, though her pulse betrayed her calm tone. Marcus Dean entered the room, holding a small silver box. "Delivery from the conference committee," he said. Naomi opened it carefully. Inside lay a white lapel pin shaped like a small feather symbol of the summit's theme, Equity in Flight. A handwritten note beneath it read, "For the woman who grounded an injustice so others could rise." Naomi exhaled softly. "They make it sound poetic," she murmured. Marcus smiled. "Well, you did stop an entire airline in 5 minutes. That's not what matters," Naomi replied. Stopping something is easy. Building something better, that's the real work. He watched her pin the feather to her blazer. Then, let's build today. The convention hall in Geneva was massive steel, glass, and light. Delegates filled the seats like waves of muted color. When Naomi stepped onto the stage, the chatter softened until the air itself seemed to hold its breath. She adjusted the microphone, her voice calm but resonant. A few months ago, she began. I was asked to leave my seat on a plane, not because my ticket was invalid, but because someone believed I didn't belong where I was sitting. A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras tilted forward, Naomi continued, her eyes steady. That moment could have ended as another story of humiliation, another headline of outrage. But instead, it became a mirror. It showed us how bias hides in systems built to serve everyone, and how silence lets it grow. She paused, scanning the sea of faces. I didn't fight to destroy an airline. I fought to remind the world that respect shouldn't depend on who's sitting beside you. Every seat, every role, every dream should belong to whoever earns it with integrity, not privilege. Applause rose like a tide, slow but swelling. Naomi waited, then leaned closer to the mic. But justice cannot live on apologies and press releases. It needs structure, accountability, and most of all, memory. The systems that discriminate have long memories. So must we. The audience stood as she closed. Every time we give up our seat to prejudice, we let the world grow smaller. I choose to stay seated. I hope you do too. When she stepped down, the applause followed her like thunder. Marcus met her at the side stage, eyes shining. You didn't just speak, he said. You made them feel. Naomi smiled faintly. Feeling's the first step. Acting is the next. After the speech, reporters swarmed like bees to honey. Questions flew in a dozen languages, flashes lighting her face. But Naomi remained poised, answering not as a celebrity but as a citizen of purpose. Dr. Ellis, a French journalist, called. You've become a global icon for accountability. How do you handle that pressure? Naomi smiled softly. By remembering I didn't start as an icon, she said. I started as a passenger who refused to be treated as less. That night, as the summit banquet came to life under crystal chandeliers, Naomi found herself beside unexpected company: Richard Langston, Elena Torres, and 2 representatives from the UN Aviation Ethics Council. They toasted quietly, not to victory, but to change. Richard raised his glass toward Naomi, to the woman who taught an industry what dignity means. Naomi chuckled gently, to the man who chose to listen when it would have been easier not to. The table laughed lightly, tension dissolving into ease. Elena leaned in. Did you know? Naomi SkyLuxe just approved the flight equity protocol, the same one you proposed. It's going into effect next quarter across all partner airlines. Naomi froze for a moment, surprised. All of them. Every single one. Elena confirmed. Over 100 carriers. Passenger rights. Anti-bias systems. Staff empathy training. It's official. The sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Naomi lowered her gaze for a heartbeat, overwhelmed. Then maybe, she said softly, we're finally learning to fly right. Later that evening, back in her suite. Naomi sat by the window again. The night outside was silver with moonlight. Her phone vibrated an email from an address she didn't recognize. She opened it cautiously. Dr. Ellis. This may sound strange, but I was the gate agent who first scanned your ticket that day. I didn't stop what happened. I froze. Watching what followed has changed me. I've joined the Passenger Equity Initiative. Thank you for forcing me to look in the mirror. Liam West. Naomi felt her eyes sting. She closed the laptop gently and whispered, "People can change. Maybe that's all the proof we ever needed." In the morning, she left the hotel early and walked along Lake Geneva, the air cool and quiet. Small boats rocked gently near the dock, and the water reflected the pale dawn. She found a cafe tucked by the water, ordered a croissant and espresso, and for once let herself just be. An older Swiss woman at the next table smiled warmly. "You are Dr. Ellis?" "Yes," she asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. The woman clasped her hands. "I watched your story. I cried," she said in broken English. "My grandson, he is mixed. He asked me, 'Grandma, can people like me be CEOs too?' I told him, 'Yes, Naomi Ellis said so.'" Naomi's throat tightened. She reached out, touching the woman's hand. "Tell him the world is changing because kids like him will make it better." As she walked away from the cafe, a faint smile curved her lips. She thought about how one humiliating flight had become a blueprint for fairness. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. When she reached the summit hall for the final panel, the room erupted in applause again. This time, though, she wasn't the subject of their admiration, she was part of their collective awakening. On the big screen behind her, the new SkyLuxe charter flashed, every seat earned, every passenger equal, every journey dignified. Naomi looked at those words, then at the faces around her. In that moment, she understood something deeper than victory. She understood endurance, the kind of quiet power that outlasts noise, headlines, and even anger. Later, as the plane home ascended over Europe, Naomi rested her head against the window. Below her, the world glimmered mountains, cities, and tiny rivers winding like veins through the earth. She thought of her mother's words, Marcus's loyalty, Elena's bravery, and Richard's redemption. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a movement stitched together by countless small acts of courage, by people who chose decency over convenience. Naomi closed her eyes as the engines hummed softly. For once, she wasn't thinking about justice or reform. She was thinking about peace earned, not given. And somewhere above the clouds, as sunlight broke across the wing, she allowed herself to believe that maybe the sky had finally learned her name. The flight back to New York cut through the clouds like a blade of light. Naomi Ellis sat quietly in seat 2A, watching the horizon blur into endless white. It felt poetic flying home after months of storms, yet this time the sky itself seemed to bow in silence. The hum of the engines was almost meditative, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel watched. Marcus was asleep in the seat beside her, his tablet still open on a half-written report. Naomi smiled faintly. "You're always trying to fix something," she whispered. "Only following your example," he murmured, eyes still closed. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Touché." As the plane began its descent into JFK, her phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Check your inbox. Something's happening." Her pulse quickened. She opened her email and found a video attachment. It was raw footage taken from a passenger's phone showing a black mother being told to move from first class because her seat must have been a mistake. The airline SkyLuxe, the same one that had reformed under her pressure. Naomi's stomach twisted. She read Elena's text again. "This happened this morning. same airline, same route. Her eyes darkened. The storm she thought had passed was returning. When the plane landed, Naomi's calm vanished. She didn't wait for baggage. She didn't even go home. She went straight to NeuroVista headquarters, hair still wind-tangled, coat unbuttoned, determination burning through fatigue. Inside the glass tower, the team scrambled as she entered. Pull every file on SkyLuxe's compliance audits. She ordered, I want names, timestamps, and training logs. Marcus caught up with her in the hallway. Naomi, breathe. We don't know the details yet. She turned sharply. A woman was humiliated in the same seat I fought for. You think I can breathe? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He knew the fire in her voice wasn't rage. It was heartbreak sharpened into focus. By noon, Elena arrived at the office with her camera bag slung across her shoulder. The footage is real, she said. Flight 804. The crew claimed seat duplication error, but the system logs show her ticket was verified twice. Someone overrode it manually. Naomi leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Who supervisor name Daniel Harris. Elena replied, new hire. Same base that trained under the new protocol. Naomi exhaled heavily. So the training failed or someone sabotaged it. The room fell silent. Marcus rubbed his temple. You know what this means. Naomi, if this gets out, they'll say the reforms didn't work. They'll question everything you built. She looked at him steadily. Then we fix it before they can destroy it. By nightfall, the video had already gone viral. News anchors replayed it under the headline, Has SkyLuxe Learned Nothing? Naomi watched the coverage in the darkened office. The screen reflected in her eyes images of the crying passenger, security guards, angry onlookers. She turned off the monitor and whispered, Not again. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. You can't carry every battle alone. Naomi shook her head. If I don't, who will? Her phone rang an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. Dr. Ellis, a male voice said. This is Commissioner Patel from the Department of Aviation Ethics. We'd like your presence at tomorrow's hearing. SkyLuxe is under review again. I'll be there, Naomi said firmly. That night. Sleep refused to come. She sat on her balcony, overlooking the East River, watching the city lights flicker like restless thoughts. The air was sharp, heavy with drizzle. Her mind replayed the mother's face, the echo of humiliation too familiar to ignore. She thought back to her own flight, to the way she'd clenched her fist to stop shaking, to how the world had only listened after she'd been broken open in front of it. And now, another woman was being forced to live the same story. She picked up her notebook and began to write. The system doesn't change when we win once. It changes when we keep showing up, even when we're tired, even when we shouldn't have to. At dawn, she arrived at the federal building, cameras flashing from every direction. Inside, the boardroom was packed journalists, lawyers, SkyLuxe executives, and the woman from the video, Amira Johnson, 34, mother of two, standing tall despite her trembling hands. Naomi approached her gently. Ms. Johnson, she said softly, I saw your video. You deserved better. Amira's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to sit where I paid to sit. She whispered. I didn't want to become a story. Naomi nodded. Understanding too well. None of us do. But sometimes stories choose us. When the hearing began, Richard Langston spoke first. His voice shook slightly as he addressed the panel. Dr. Ellis warned us about complacency. We failed to uphold her protocols. This is not her failure, it's ours. Naomi was called next. She stood before the microphone, steady but fierce. Progress isn't a policy you sign once and forget. It's a discipline, she said. If SkyLuxe or any company believes bias can be erased with a workshop, they're wrong. Bias is a virus. It mutates when ignored. She turned toward the executives. You built systems that remember privilege but forget accountability. That stops now. Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. When the hearing adjourned, the crowd erupted into questions. Naomi didn't speak to the press. She walked straight to Amira, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." 2 days later, the outcome was announced. SkyLuxe's operating license was suspended pending full restructuring. Naomi was appointed as interim ethics director, a decision that shocked the industry. Reporters flooded the streets outside Neuro Vista, shouting questions. "Dr. Ellis, are you taking control of SkyLuxe?" She replied calmly, "No, I'm taking responsibility for the promise I made." Inside her office, Marcus looked at her with a tired smile. "You just became the first black woman to run one of the world's largest airlines." Naomi sank into her chair, half laughing, half sighing. "I didn't ask for this." He shrugged. "Maybe, but maybe the sky did." For weeks, Naomi worked around the clock, meeting with pilots, attendants, engineers. She visited terminals unannounced, talked to janitors and desk agents, rebuilt policies from scratch. One night, she sat in an empty hangar watching maintenance crews polish the wing of a jet. A young mechanic approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Dr. Ellis, right. I was here when they fired that crew months ago. Back then, I thought you were just angry. But now, I get it." Naomi smiled faintly. "What changed your mind?" He looked at the plane. "You made us believe the work we do matters. You didn't just punish, you built something worth keeping." For the first time in days, Naomi felt the heaviness lift a little. By the time SkyLuxe reopened, a quiet revolution had taken root. The company's motto now glowed above every terminal, every seat, every story, equal. At the relaunch press conference, Naomi stood before the crowd, wind rustling her hair. "We can't rewrite the past," she said, voice firm but warm, "but we can make sure no one ever has to live it again." As applause rolled across the tarmac, Naomi looked up at the sky. Somewhere in its vastness, she imagined her mother's voice again, soft, certain, proud. "Keep flying, baby girl. The sky remembers." The morning after the relaunch, the first SkyLuxe flight under Naomi's new leadership lifted from JFK into a dawn sky painted in gold and lilac. Naomi stood on the observation deck with Marcus and Elena, her coat fluttering in the wind. Below, cameras flashed, reporters cheered, and a banner stretched across the tarmac read, "New SkyLuxe, where every journey matters." As the engines roared, Naomi's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. "Look at that," Marcus said softly. "Your storm turned into a sunrise." Naomi smiled. "It wasn't my storm," she said. "It belonged to everyone who refused to be silent." For weeks, SkyLuxe became a symbol of rebirth. Passengers shared their stories online, attendants smiling, captains shaking hands with travelers, families reunited without fear. The new ethics program rolled out in phases, starting with the Seat Project, a virtual reality module that trained staff to experience discrimination from the other side of the counter. The feedback was staggering. I didn't know what it felt like to be treated invisible, one pilot admitted in a recorded interview. Now, I'll never forget. Naomi worked tirelessly but quietly, refusing interviews and awards. Let the results speak. She often told Elena, not the noise, but the noise came anyway. Late-night hosts praised her as the woman who taught the world how to fly with conscience. The New York Times named her Person of the Year. And yet, Naomi's focus never wavered. She spent her mornings visiting crews, her afternoons reviewing reform reports, her nights writing letters to young engineers who reached out saying, "You made me believe I could belong." Still, beneath the calm surface, something tugged inside her a deep exhaustion she hadn't allowed herself to feel. One evening, she sat alone in her office, the city lights blinking like faraway heartbeats. Marcus entered quietly. "You haven't been home in 3 days," he said, setting down a cup of tea. Naomi smiled faintly. "Home feels too quiet. My mind gets loud there." "Then maybe it's time to let it be loud," Marcus said gently. "You've spent months fixing everything around you. Maybe it's time to fix what's inside." She didn't answer, but the words stayed with her. That night, she opened her journal again and wrote, "Power without peace becomes noise, and justice without rest turns into another kind of cruelty." The next day, Naomi did something she hadn't done in years. She took a train, not a private jet, to visit her mother's old neighborhood in Atlanta. The air was thick with magnolia scent, and children played on cracked sidewalks. A small bookstore still stood on the corner, its sign faded but proud, Harriet's words. Inside, an elderly woman looked up from the counter. "Can I help you?" Dear Naomi smiled. "I think you already did," she said, pointing at a worn photo framed on the wall, a young woman holding a baby, eyes bright with fire. "Her mother. You're her daughter." The woman gasped. "Lord, she used to read poetry here every Friday night. Said her little girl would change the world someday." Naomi blinked back tears. She believed before I did. The woman handed her a yellowed notebook. "She left this here once. Said she wanted you to have it if you ever came back." Naomi opened it slowly. Inside were pages of poems, rough, unpolished, but pulsing with love and faith. One line caught her breath. "When the world tells you to move, build wings instead." For the first time in months, Naomi let herself cry. She sat there for hours, surrounded by books and ghosts and the sound of children laughing outside. When she returned to New York, she carried that notebook like a talisman. She called Marcus and Elena into her office and laid it on the table. "This," she said, "is what comes next." They exchanged puzzled looks. Naomi continued, "We've built equity into one airline. Now let's take it everywhere. Transportation, healthcare, education systems that forget who they're built for. We'll remind them." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean an entire network?" Naomi nodded. "A living framework. Call it the Horizon Project." Elena smiled slowly. "You'll never rest, do you?" Naomi laughed softly. "Maybe that's what wings are for." Months later, Horizon launched with global partners. Companies signed on to adopt dignity-centered models inspired by Naomi's work. A quiet revolution was spreading not through outrage, but through consistency, compassion, and structure. But one final test awaited her. A live debate was announced: Naomi Ellis versus Senator Charles Whitford, a skeptic who opposed corporate equity mandates. The event drew millions of viewers worldwide. On the night of the debate, The stage lights glared bright and hot. Whitford leaned into his microphone, smirking. "Dr. Ellis," he began, "your reforms sound noble, but isn't it unrealistic to think we can police human bias? Isn't that just human nature?" Naomi met his gaze calmly. "No one's asking to police humanity. Senator, we're asking to protect it." He scoffed. "So you believe a few policies can change centuries of prejudice?" Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Policies don't change people. Stories do. Systems either amplify those stories or silence them. I choose amplification." The audience erupted in applause. Whitford hesitated, then forced a smile. Naomi continued, her voice steady but tender. "We can't erase prejudice, but we can make sure it no longer has power over a person's dignity. That's the difference between history repeating itself and progress taking root." When the debate ended, social media exploded with praise. Hashtags trended again: Housefly Equal, Horizon Project, Naomi Ellis. But Naomi didn't stay to bask in victory. She slipped out quietly into the cool night, her coat brushing against the wind. She found herself at the pier, overlooking the city skyline. The Hudson shimmered under the moonlight. Marcus soon appeared beside her, hands in his pockets. "You were brilliant," he said. Naomi smiled. So was the audience. They finally heard something worth keeping. He chuckled. "What now? You fixed an airline, built a movement, embarrassed a senator. What's left?" Naomi looked out at the water, her reflection rippling softly. "The same thing that's always left," she said. "To keep teaching the sky who it belongs to." A plane soared overhead just then, its lights streaking like a comet across the night. Naomi tilted her head back, following it until it disappeared into the dark. "That one," she said quietly, "belongs to everyone." A small silence passed between them, not heavy, but peaceful, the kind of silence that said the fight was worth it. Marcus looked at her, his voice low. "You know, Naomi, when history remembers you, it won't just remember what you did, it'll remember how you made people feel safe again." Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the city light. "Then maybe," she said, "we've all finally landed." As dawn broke, the first Horizon flight took off. Painted on its side were 3 simple words in silver letters: "Dignity takes flight." And somewhere high above, where clouds met sunlight, the sky whispered back the truth Naomi had lived for all along, that justice wasn't vengeance, equality wasn't charity, and power meant nothing without grace. Because the sky, finally, belonged to everyone. Winter had returned to New York, brushing the skyline with a quiet silver hue. From the top floor of Neuro Vista Tower, Naomi Ellis could see her reflection against the glass, older now, calmer, but still carrying the same fire in her eyes. Months had passed since the Horizon project launched, and though the world celebrated its success, Naomi knew that light always came with a price. Her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from Elena. "We have a problem. Horizon's partner in Chicago. Helicore Systems just leaked internal memos. They're calling Horizon political propaganda. You need to see this." Naomi felt a cold ache in her chest. She had expected resistance. Change always attracted backlash, but she hadn't expected betrayal from within. When she arrived at the Horizon offices, Elena was pacing near the monitors, eyes dark with frustration. "They're trying to discredit the entire movement," she said. "They've edited documents to make it look like you used Horizon for personal gain." Naomi took the tablet, scrolling through the falsified memos. Her name appeared beside words she never wrote: influence, control, monetary gain. Each one twisted her work into something corrupt. Marcus entered moments later, his face tense. The story's already trending. They're calling it the Ellis Empire Scandal. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "We've been here before, but this time, it's not a misunderstanding." Marcus warned, "It's an attack." Naomi looked up, her voice steady. "Then we respond the same way we always have with truth." That evening, she called a press conference. Cameras crowded the lobby. Microphones lined the podium. When Naomi stepped onto the stage, the room hushed instantly. "I've been accused of building an empire out of empathy," she began, her tone calm but unwavering. "If teaching companies to treat people with dignity is an empire, then I accept the title. But I built no empire, I built accountability." Flashes erupted like lightning, but Naomi didn't flinch. You can't corrupt something that's built on transparency. The Horizon Project was never mine. It belongs to every worker, every traveler, every person who ever asked to be seen. When she finished, the room burst into applause. But behind the cameras, Naomi noticed something unusual. A woman standing near the back, holding a small notebook. Their eyes met briefly. The woman nodded once, as if in understanding, then disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, Naomi sat alone in her office, watching snowflakes melt against the glass. The weight of it all pressed down on her. For the first time in years, she wondered if maybe she had given too much of herself away. She reached into her drawer and pulled out her mother's old notebook, the one filled with poems and ink smudges. Turning to a random page, she read, "To light the way for others, you must be willing to burn a little." Naomi smiled sadly. "I'm still burning." "Mama," she whispered. Her phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Dr. Ellis," a familiar voice said. "This is Amira Johnson. I wanted to thank you again. I'm training new recruits at SkyLuxe now. They call me Captain Johnson these days." Naomi's eyes softened. "Captain, that has a nice sound to it." Amira laughed gently. "I still remember what you told me at the hearing, that stories choose us. You were right. My story's helping others now. I thought you'd want to know." After the call ended, Naomi sat quietly for a long while. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of warmth remained. Maybe this was what her mother meant. The cost of light wasn't just sacrifice, it was purpose. The next morning, Marcus found her standing in front of a whiteboard filled with names and arrows. "You're planning again," he said, half amused, half exasperated. Naomi smirked. "Always. But this time, not for Horizon." He frowned. "Then what?" She circled 2 words at the top of the board. "The fellowship. I'm creating a scholarship program," she explained. "For young leaders, not just in tech or aviation, but anywhere discrimination tried to silence them. I want to help them build their wings before the world tries to cut them." Marcus nodded slowly, admiration softening his features. "You really don't stop." "Do you?" Naomi looked at him, her voice gentle. "Change doesn't stop, Marcus. It just changes form. Within weeks, the Harriet Fellowship launched, named after her mother. Applications flooded in from around the world, a pilot from Kenya, a coder from Detroit, a teacher from Brazil. Each one carried a story of resilience. Elena filmed the announcement documentary. In one scene, Naomi stood inside an empty hangar, sunlight pouring through the high windows. "I used to think justice was about punishment," she said to the camera, "but justice is about continuation. Every person who dares to be kind in an unkind world continues what others began." The video went viral overnight, but Naomi didn't celebrate. She spent that evening quietly walking through Central Park. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Across the frozen lake, children laughed, throwing snowballs into the cold air. For once, she felt small, not in insignificance, but in gratitude. Her phone buzzed again, a voice message this time. From Elena, "Turn on Channel 7, you'll want to see this." Naomi hurried back home and flipped on the TV. The news anchor was smiling. "Breaking tonight, Horizon's independent audit shows 0 confirmed bias incidents since its relaunch, a first in commercial aviation history. Experts call it the Ellis effect." Naomi sank into her couch, tears brimming. For once, she allowed herself to feel it, the joy, the relief, the quiet victory. Outside, the city lights flickered like constellations. Naomi thought of everyone she'd met along the way: Amira, Elena, Marcus, even Richard Langston. Each of them had carried a piece of the story forward. Her gaze drifted upward to the window. A plane streaked across the night, its lights glowing against the stars. She whispered, "Keep flying." The next morning, Naomi met Marcus at the pier for coffee. The air was cold, sharp, alive. "You look lighter," he said. Naomi smiled. "Maybe because I finally understand something." "And what's that?" She sipped her coffee, eyes on the sky, that the work we do doesn't belong to us. It belongs to whoever picks it up next. Marcus nodded. "Then you've done your part." "Maybe," Naomi said softly, "but the sky still has room for more." They stood together as the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the city in gold. Somewhere behind them, the sound of a departing flight echoed faintly through the air. For the first time, Naomi didn't feel like she was chasing something. She felt like she'd arrived. It was a gray spring morning when Naomi Ellis found herself sitting alone in the quiet auditorium of Columbia University. The rows of empty seats stretched before her, the air still holding the faint echo of applause from the night before. The university had just named a new ethics and leadership center after her, the Naomi Ellis Institute for Human Equity. Cameras had flashed, hands had shaken, speeches had been made. But now, in the stillness after the noise, she felt something deeper than pride. She felt the weight of silence, the kind that follows completion. She traced the edges of the wooden stage with her fingertips. "You did it," she whispered, not to herself, but to the people who had walked beside her: Marcus, Elena, Amira, even the strangers whose courage had shaped the path. "You all did it." A door creaked open behind her. Marcus stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're doing that thing again," he said, his voice soft. "Sitting in the dark after saving the world." Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm just listening." The quiet sounds different now. He handed her a cup and sat beside her. Different how she took a slow sip before answering. "It used to feel empty. Now it feels earned." Marcus nodded, thoughtful. "You've turned silence into something powerful. That's rare." Before Naomi could reply, the auditorium doors opened again. Elena entered, camera in hand, her eyes bright with purpose. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something you need to see." She set up her laptop on the stage and played a short video clip. It was from a classroom middle school. Maybe. A young girl stood before her classmates, reading from a paper. "My name is Jada," the girl said shyly, "and my hero is Naomi Ellis." Because when someone told her she didn't belong in her seat, she didn't fight back with hate, she built more seats. Naomi covered her mouth, eyes glistening. The class erupted in applause on the video, and Jada smiled, her small face glowing with pride. Elena turned to Naomi. "It's part of a campaign I'm helping launch with the fellowship school's Voices That Fly. Kids all over the world are sharing how your story changed them." Naomi shook her head slowly. "No, Elena, it's not my story anymore. It's theirs." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Naomi stood, looking around the vast, empty room. "Do you remember what my mother used to say?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled. "Something about wings." Naomi nodded. She said, "To light the way for others, you must be willing to burn a little. I think I've burned enough for now." Later that afternoon, Naomi walked through the streets of Harlem. The city was alive with spring flower carts, jazz from open cafes, children chasing pigeons through the park. She felt anonymous again, just another person among millions. It was peaceful. She stopped at a mural near 125th Street. Painted across the brick wall was her own image, not the polished version from magazines, but a softer one, her holding a notebook, eyes turned toward the sky. Underneath were the words, "Dignity is not a luxury. It's a right." A man selling roasted peanuts nearby recognized her. "Dr. Ellis," he called, smiling. "That mural, my cousin painted it. Said you reminded her people that decency still exists." Naomi laughed quietly. "Tell your cousin she reminded me." That evening, she attended the fellowship's first graduation ceremony. The hall buzzed with hope. Dozens of young leaders, engineers, teachers, artists stood proudly on stage. The first to speak was a tall woman with a confident voice. "I was told once that power and kindness couldn't coexist," she said. "Then I met Dr. Naomi Ellis. She proved they could not only coexist, they could transform the world together." The crowd applauded, some wiping tears. Naomi watched from the back of the room, her heart full but steady. She didn't need the spotlight anymore. The next generation was standing exactly where they belonged in it. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the night air. A soft drizzle had begun to fall, the city shimmering under streetlights. Elena joined her, camera slung over her shoulder. "They're saying the Institute wants to immortalize your speech in a textbook," she said. "Generations of students will study your words." Naomi smiled faintly. "Then let them study not my words, but my mistakes too. That's where the real lessons live." Elena tilted her head. "Do you ever regret it? The fights, the pain, the exhaustion?" Naomi thought for a moment. "Regret? No. But sometimes I grieve the quiet life I never had." She looked up at the gray sky, but then again, maybe peace isn't the absence of noise. Maybe it's knowing your noise mattered. The next morning, Naomi sat by her window overlooking the river. For once, there was no schedule, no meeting, no crisis to manage. The world she helped rebuild was running without her hand guiding every thread. That realization, instead of emptiness, brought relief. Her phone buzzed with a new message. A video call request from Amira Johnson. Naomi accepted, smiling as the screen filled with Amira's bright face framed by a pilot's headset. "Dr. Ellis," Amira said, her voice crackling slightly over the radio. "Just wanted to say we're crossing the Atlantic now. Skies clear, crew's happy." And guess what? We just hit our first full year without a single passenger discrimination complaint. Naomi's eyes softened. That's the real victory. Captain. Amira grinned. No, ma'am, you're the victory. We're just flying in your slipstream. The call ended, but the warmth lingered. Naomi closed her eyes and let the sound of distant traffic blend with the wind outside. It felt like the hum of an airplane. That evening, she attended a small dinner at a quiet restaurant by the river with Marcus and Elena. They laughed, reminisced, and toasted to everything that had been and everything that would be. When the meal ended, Marcus leaned back and said, "You know, Naomi, someday there's going to be a movie about you." Naomi chuckled. "If there is, promise me one thing. Let them show the messy parts too." Elena smiled knowingly. That's the only kind worth telling. As the night deepened, Naomi walked home alone through the city that had both tested and embraced her. Passing through Times Square, she glanced up at a digital billboard. It was playing a short clip from a Horizon documentary, her own voice narrating softly, "Justice is not about being louder, it's about being lasting." The screen faded to black, replaced by the simple phrase, "Inspired by Naomi Ellis for every person who ever refused to move." Naomi stopped, letting the words sink in. Then, with a small, quiet smile, she whispered, "That'll do." When she reached her apartment, the river glimmered in the distance. She poured herself a cup of tea, opened her mother's notebook one last time, and added a new line beneath the final poem. And when silence came, it wasn't the end. It was the echo of everything that mattered. Then she closed the book gently, placed it on the windowsill, and watched as dawn began to rise again, soft, golden, and full of promise. The world outside kept moving, but this time it was moving in rhythm with everything she had stood for. Naomi Ellis didn't need to fly anymore. The sky, at last, was flying with her. The anniversary came quietly. No red carpet, no flashing lights, no headlines, just a circle of people in a sunlit hangar at JFK Airport, standing before a plaque engraved with the words, "Every seat deserves respect." Naomi Ellis stood at the center, her palms resting lightly on the podium. The morning light cut through the windows, painting soft gold across her face. She looked out at the crowd: pilots, attendants, engineers, custodians, even passengers who'd written to her in the months after the scandal that changed everything. It wasn't a celebration, it was remembrance. "Flight 227, she began, her voice calm but steady. Wasn't just a flight, it was a mirror. It showed us who we were and who we still needed to become. Her eyes found familiar faces among the crowd, Elena filming quietly, Marcus leaning against a pillar with his usual quiet strength, and Amira standing tall in her uniform, the emblem of the reformed airline gleaming on her chest. Naomi continued. "A year ago, I was asked to leave a seat I had paid for. Today, I stand in a room full of people who've rebuilt an entire system so no one else will ever be asked the same." A soft murmur of agreement spread through the audience. Behind Naomi, the new SkyLuxe Air logo shimmered, a symbol redesigned under her guidance. Gone were the silver wings of privilege. In their place, two hands intertwined around a single horizon line. When the applause faded, Naomi stepped down from the podium and moved through the crowd. She greeted employees she'd never met before: ground crew from Atlanta, flight attendants from Dallas, a janitor named Luis who told her he'd started night classes in ethics after hearing her story. Each person, in their own quiet way, had been touched by that single act of injustice and by what came after. Later that afternoon, Naomi joined Marcus and Elena in the airline's new cultural ethics office overlooking the runway. Planes lifted into the air one by one, silver arrows cutting through the clouds. "You know," Marcus said, watching a jet ascend, "I never thought I'd see an airline grounded by conscience and rise stronger because of it." Elena nodded, typing notes for her documentary. It's the first time an aviation scandal didn't end in lawsuits, but in education. Naomi smiled softly, because this time, the people inside the system wanted to change too. That's what made it different. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jessica Miller, the former flight attendant who had once humiliated her. Naomi hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Dr. Ellis," the message read, "I just wanted you to know I finished my certification. I'm now teaching anti-bias communication for crew members. I still carry the shame of what I did, but I'm trying to use it to help others unlearn what I never questioned. Thank you for giving me that second chance." Naomi exhaled slowly. She remembered the rage she'd once felt toward Jessica, the sting of humiliation that had burned for weeks after that day. And now, that same woman was helping others grow. It wasn't redemption through apology, it was redemption through action. "She's teaching now," Naomi said quietly, passing the phone to Marcus. He read the message and smiled. "That's the reform you were fighting for. Not punishment, but perspective. Perspective changes more than policies." Naomi replied, "It changes people." That evening, as the sun dipped low, the team walked along the tarmac toward a small garden near Terminal C. It had been planted by SkyLuxe employees and named the Reflection Garden. At its center stood a sculpture, an open seat made of polished steel, with the word "belonging" etched along its frame. Naomi knelt to touch the base. It was warm from the sun nearby. Children of employees played tag between the flower beds, their laughter mingling with the distant roar of planes. Elena crouched beside her. "Do you ever think about how one small moment could ripple into all this?" Naomi smiled. "Every day. I used to wish that flight never happened. Now, I see it had to." She paused, watching a plane climb into the evening sky. Sometimes we're chosen by our pain, but we can choose what we make of it. That night, Naomi returned home to her apartment by the river. She poured herself tea, turned on the small lamp by her desk, and began writing in her journal. April 18th, 1 year later. "I no longer dream about the flight. I dream about the people who came after, the ones who chose to see, to change, to teach. Maybe healing isn't forgetting. Maybe it's remembering differently." She closed the notebook, her eyes catching the framed photograph nearby her mother. Harriet, smiling in front of a chalkboard full of her students' names. Naomi whispered, "You'd be proud. Mom." The next morning brought another ripple of change. SkyLuxe announced a global partnership with Horizon, the AI ethics company Naomi had founded years ago. Together, they were launching the Equity Cloud, a data-driven program designed to detect bias in service industries before it caused harm. It wasn't just for airlines, it was for banks, hotels, schools, and hospitals. Reporters called it revolutionary. Naomi called it necessary. During the press conference, a journalist asked, "Dr. Ellis, what do you hope people remember about your story a decade from now?" Naomi looked directly into the camera. "I hope they don't remember me. I hope they remember that one seat can hold the weight of history and that fairness doesn't need a headline to matter." Her answer trended worldwide within hours. People began sharing their own seat moments, times they had spoken up, stepped aside, or stood firm in the face of prejudice. The hashtag "Your Every Seat Matters" began trending across the U.S., then Europe, then globally. Months later, Naomi found herself once again on a SkyLuxe flight, this time not as a passenger, but as a guest speaker en route to Geneva for a global equity summit. As she boarded, a young flight attendant smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard. Dr. Ellis, I read your book. It changed how I see people." Naomi's heart softened. Then it did its job. As she settled into her seat, ironically, the same number as that fateful flight. 2A, she looked out the window. Below, the city lights faded into darkness, replaced by endless sky. She whispered, almost to herself, maybe this was never about losing a seat. Maybe it was about making room for everyone else. The captain's voice came through the speaker. "Good evening, passengers. This is your captain, Amira Johnson, welcoming you aboard SkyLuxe Flight 102 to Geneva. We'll be cruising at 38,000 feet. And remember, everyone on this flight belongs here." Naomi smiled, eyes glistening. It wasn't just a line, it was a promise kept. Hours later, somewhere over the Atlantic, Naomi opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath her last entry. "When justice finally lands, it doesn't roar, it hums quietly, like peace at cruising altitude. Outside, the stars stretched endless and patient, as if the universe itself was finally listening." The Geneva summit had gathered some of the most influential minds in the world, political leaders, corporate giants, activists, and journalists. Yet, as Naomi Ellis stood backstage, preparing to deliver the keynote speech that would close the conference, she didn't feel like a powerful woman standing before the world. She felt like a daughter, a student, and a survivor of a single humiliating moment that had rippled into something she never planned, but somehow understood she was meant to build. She adjusted the lapel microphone, her reflection flickering on the glass wall beside her. Beyond it, the Alps gleamed white against a blue horizon. The scene reminded her of the endless skies she once feared stepping into again. Marcus appeared beside her, holding a folder. "They've added one more slide to your presentation," he said. "Elena thought you'd want to see it before you go up." Naomi took the folder, flipping it open. Her breath caught. The slide showed dozens of faces not famous. Not powerful, but ordinary people from around the world. A flight attendant from Kenya, a train conductor from Japan, a teacher from Mississippi, a hotel manager from Brazil, all holding signs that read, "Because of your story, I chose respect." She blinked away the tears threatening her composure. "She always knows how to finish a story," Naomi whispered. "Maybe," Marcus said softly, "but this one's still being written." Moments later, Naomi stepped onto the stage. The vast hall was silent. Thousands of faces turned toward her, the weight of expectation heavy, but somehow kind. She began, her voice steady, warm, and deeply human. "A few years ago," she said, "I was told to move from a seat I had paid for. That moment was not about luxury or entitlement. It was about visibility, about being told, without words, that dignity could be reassigned." The audience leaned forward, hanging on each syllable. "What happened next wasn't my plan. It was a consequence of silence breaking, of truth recording itself, of people finally refusing to look away. But let me be honest with you, justice didn't arrive the moment the crew was fired. It began when the system admitted it had failed, and it continues only as long as we choose to protect one another's right to belong. A soft murmur of agreement filled the air. Naomi took a small pause, letting her words breathe. I've met people who lost their jobs for doing what was right, and people who found purpose after doing what was wrong. The truth is, both are part of progress. Accountability without compassion turns to cruelty. Compassion without accountability turns to chaos. What we need is balance firm enough to stand for what's right, gentle enough to welcome those ready to change. She lifted her gaze to the audience, her tone deepening. Every industry, every nation, every home must ask the same question: who do we still make invisible? Because justice isn't a monument, it's maintenance. When she ended, the room was utterly still for a long, breathless moment. Then the applause came, slow and thunderous, waves of it rolling through the hall. People rose to their feet, some crying, some cheering, some simply standing in quiet reflection. After the speech, Naomi descended the stage to find Elena waiting by the exit, camera in hand. That last line, Elena said softly, "It's going to live forever." Naomi smiled faintly. "I don't want it to live forever. I want it to work tomorrow, that night, as the city of Geneva shimmered along the lake shore." Naomi sat by her hotel balcony with a small glass of wine. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. Across the lake, the faint lights of planes blinked against the sky like small heartbeats in motion. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Jessica Miller. Now, training crew members in empathy worldwide. Attached was a photo, a classroom full of flight attendants listening to a recording of Naomi's speech. Jessica had written, "They still cry when you talk about balance." Naomi typed back simply, "Then they're listening with their hearts." The next morning, as Naomi prepared to return to New York, she found a letter slipped under her door. The envelope was handwritten, the script elegant but unfamiliar. Inside was a single page. "Dear Dr. Ellis, you don't know me, but I was on Flight 227 that day. I didn't say anything when they asked you to move. I told myself it wasn't my business. For months, I carried the shame of that silence, but last week, when a colleague mocked a passenger because of her accent, I spoke up, I stopped him, and for the first time, I understood what courage feels like. Thank you, not for fighting for yourself, but for teaching the rest of us to fight for someone else. Daniel Harper, Passenger 14C." Naomi folded the letter gently, pressing it to her chest. That, she thought, was the real reform, the kind that didn't need a company, a title, or a law, the kind that started in ordinary hearts, on the flight home. Naomi sat by the window again, her reflection faint against the sky. The same airline that had once humiliated her now carried her with reverence. The cabin crew greeted her warmly, and when Captain Amira's voice filled the speakers, Naomi couldn't help but smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're flying over the Atlantic, and our seatbelt sign is on. But while you're buckled in, I invite you to unbuckle your minds. Remember, respect isn't about where we sit, it's how we see." The passengers chuckled softly, the mood light, but Naomi's heart swelled. That message, delivered so casually, so naturally, meant more than any policy could. Hours later, she landed in New York. The city was drenched in sunset, skyscrapers gleaming like molten glass. She stepped outside the terminal and looked up. The sky, vast and endless, felt different now, not as something she had to conquer, but as something she finally shared. A young journalist approached her near the exit. "Dr. Ellis," he said breathlessly, "I'm writing about your summit speech. One question after everything. Do you believe people can really change?" Naomi smiled, her voice calm, unwavering. People don't just change. They wake up, and once you've seen the truth, you can't go back to sleep. The journalist nodded, clearly moved. As Naomi walked toward her waiting car, the crowd parted instinctively to let her pass, not out of fear or reverence, but respect. The quiet kind, the real kind. Later that night, back in her apartment, Naomi placed Daniel's letter beside her mother's notebook. She opened a new page and wrote her final reflection. "The world told me to move, and I did, but not backward forward, toward a future where no one has to prove they belong. The sky belongs to everyone. Always has, always will." She closed the notebook, the river lights flickering through her window. In the distance, a plane soared into the night, steady, luminous, free. Naomi whispered to herself, "Fly well, whoever you are." The sky remembers kindness, and for the first time in years, she slept deeply. Knowing the story had not ended, it had only taken flight. The story of Naomi Ellis teaches us that dignity is not given. It's claimed through grace, courage, and restraint. Her experience reminds us that injustice often appears in quiet, everyday forms. Yet our response to it defines our legacy. Instead of shouting in anger, Naomi acted with clarity and principle, proving that calm conviction can dismantle prejudice more powerfully than rage ever could. For older audiences, her story offers a gentle but profound reflection. Wisdom isn't silence, it's knowing when to speak with purpose. True strength isn't in forcing others to change, but in becoming the mirror that compels them to see. Every generation faces its own version of that seat, a place where our worth is questioned, where we must decide whether to retreat or stand tall. Naomi chose to rise, not for revenge, but for reform. And through that choice, she left behind something enduring, the belief that justice, when led by compassion, not only corrects the past, it heals the future. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Naomi's story touched your heart, if it reminded you of dignity, empathy, or second chances, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling powerful human stories that inspire change. Together, let's make sure voices like Naomi's never fade into silence, because sometimes one story can open the sky for everyone.